Hi, my name is Sebastian Matteau, and in this video I would like to show you how you can create a very simple visual search or attentional capture experiment in OpenSesame 3.2. And we're also going to use a few cool new features in OpenSesame 3.2, which was just released last week. Now, this is not going to be a very difficult tutorial, but I do assume some basic knowledge of OpenSesame. So if you're completely new to OpenSesame, I would recommend first walking through the beginner tutorial or watching the beginner tutorial on YouTube. And then once you know the basic tricks, revisit this tutorial. Now, let's start. So what do we want to do? Well, we want to create an experiment in which participants click on the unique shape. So here we see the instructions screen, which explains it very well, I think. There is one unique shape, right, which is a square. And then there are three distractors, which are circles. And the participants should just click on the unique shape, click on the square. On some trials, one of the distractors, in this case the yellow one, has a different color from the other stimuli. And the idea is that unique color will capture your attention very strongly and will make you slower in responding to the target, right? So the square is the target, the other ones are distractors, and sometimes one of the distractors has a unique color. But not always. Sometimes they would all be blue, or sometimes everything would be yellow, right? So all possible combinations occur. Now, so what is the structure of our experiment? We're going to use a very, very simple structure to save us some time, to keep the video short, which is essentially a block loop. So one block of trials, up. So I drag a loop item into the experiment, I call it block loop, and that will correspond to one block of trials. And in the block loop, I drag a sequence, insert, and I call that trial sequence, indicating that this corresponds to a single trial, right? So we have a very basic structure of a single trial that is executed multiple times by our block loop. Now, how does our trial start? So let's start with the trial sequence. We start as usual with a fixation dot. So I pick up the sketchpad, drag it into the trial sequence. Up. I call it fix dot. Duration, well, let's say 1000 milliseconds, a bit long maybe for a fixation dot. Okay. Click on the fixation dot element, and in the center of the screen we draw a fixation dot. Now, then after the fixation dot, we want to have our search display. So what should our search display look like? Well, we can create it from scratch, but essentially in our instructions, we already have quite a nice example of a search display. So what I'm going to do is simply say, create an unlinked copy of our instructions and paste it into our trial sequence, and I call that search display. Now, our search display is very similar, of course, to the instructions. Otherwise, the instructions wouldn't be good. But we don't actually want to have the instructions in there, so let's throw this away. Up. And up this way and this way. Right now the duration of the search display is set to key press, right? Which means that it will stay on the screen until you press a key. What we're going to do is change it to 0 and then have it followed by a mouse response. Up, mouse response. So what happens now is not that the search display is shown only for 0 milliseconds, but it is shown and then the experiment moves on right away to the mouse response item, which collects a mouse response. So now we have a working experiment of sorts. Let's click on the run button, up. Quick run. There we are. Click on the unique shape. Okay, up, unique shape. The experiment finished successfully, right? We only have one trial. Clearly this is not good, right? This is not finished. It works, but it's not finished. So let's go back to the search display. What do we want to change? Well, first of all, we want to change the colors. We don't always want to have a blue target and a yellow distractor here. Rather, we want to use variables to specify those colors. So I click on the target and I say instead of blue, I use target color, the variable target color, to define the color of the target. Right? The square brackets indicate that target color is the name of a variable. This distractor has the same color, also target color. This distractor also has that color. You see that OpenSesame recognizes that we're using variables and now uses kind of a placeholder color, greenish, to indicate that. Now, this distractor is a case in itself. It does not always have the same color as the target, so we use a different variable. Distractor, color, up. Okay, so now we are assuming that there's a variable target color and a variable distractor color, but we don't actually have that variable yet, so we still need to define it. So how do we do that? Well, we go to the block loop here. And in the block loop, we define target color and distractor color. Up. And we give it we have all possible combinations. So we have blue, blue, yellow, yellow, and here blue, yellow, blue, yellow. Okay. Now if you run the experiment, we have 4 trials, right? Corresponding to each possible color combination. And it should be used, if I didn't make any mistakes, it should be used in our search display. So let's see if it works. Quick run. Okay, the instructions. Up. Very good. Okay. Now obviously we're not done yet, right? So what is still severely missing here is the fact it works, but all the stimuli are always at fixed positions. Right? The target is always here on the left, and that's not a search task, right? You can just keep the mouse there and click on the target right away. So how can we make these the coordinates of these stimuli variable? How can we randomize those coordinates? Well, we can do that in various ways, but what I want to show you here in this video is how you can access the elements from a sketchpad in a script. So, and that is a very powerful technique. So here I select. And first you need to give names to the elements. So I click on the target and I simply name the target target. I name this dist1, right? First distractor. This is dist2. And this one, final one, is called dist3. So now we have 4 elements named target, dist1, dist2, and dist3. How can we change the coordinates of those elements? Now what we can do is use an inline script here, this thing, and we drag it after the search display, and I rename that to random positions. Then I go to the prepare tab of this inline script. And why? Well, what we want to do is after the search display has been prepared, but before it is shown, we want to randomize the positions of the elements on it, right? So, and that is why during the prepare phase of the search display, the display will be generated. Then during the prepare phase of the script that we're going to create, we're going to randomize the positions. And then later during the run phase, we will actually show everything on the screen. So this is an example of taking into account a prepare run strategy that OpenSesame uses. And if that's a bit confusing, and it can be a bit confusing, I would recommend looking at the documentation on the OpenSesame documentation about that. So, but first things first, what do we need to do? Well, we need to get a list of positions. How can we get a list of positions? Again, we can do that in many different ways. But what we can do is say, okay, make use of the XY circle function, which is built in to OpenSesame. As a first argument, n, we say that we want 4 positions. The second argument, row, we want to have an eccentricity of 200. So what we have now, positions is XY circle, is that we get a list of positions, 4 positions, in a circle, an imaginary circle around the fixation dot in the center with an eccentricity of 2. Now, this list is not random yet. So what we want to do is use from random import shuffle. And then we want to say, okay, shuffle position. So shuffle is a function that takes a list and randomizes the order of the elements in that list, right? So now we have a list of random well, no, not a list of random positions, but we have a list of positions in a random order. Okay, so far so good. Now, how do we access the elements of the search display? So what we can do, we say, okay, search canvas. Oh, search canvas. Search canvas is going to be the canvas that corresponds to our search display. How do we do that? Well, we have an items object in OpenSesame, and the items object is kind of like a dictionary that has all the items in the experiment in it. So items search display will give us the search display item, which is our sketchpad. And that sketchpad has a property, canvas, that is the canvas of that sketchpad, right? So now search canvas will correspond to the canvas object of our search display sketchpad. Not that difficult, right? On the search canvas, we have on the search canvas, we have a target. So the search canvas itself is again kind of like a dictionary, and the elements that have a name can be accessed like this, right? So this is the target element in our search canvas. And that target element has 2 properties, namely an x coordinate and also a y coordinate. Now what do we want to do? Well, we want to take the first element from this positions list and assign it to these x and these y coordinates. So what we can say, okay, x comma y is positions 0. And then we can say up x is y, right? So basically this works. Now we change the position of our target element to the first position in this list. We can do the same thing a little bit more elegantly, I think a little bit more Pythonic, if we do make use of multiple assignment. So what we can say is, rather than first extracting the positions, we can do it automatically like this. We can say, okay, positions 0. So position 0 will be an xy tuple, and we assign it immediately to the y coordinate and the x coordinate of our target. Easy peasy. Up. And we do the same thing 3 more times, because we have 3 distractors. 1, 2, 3. Okay, dist 3, dist 2, dist 1, 1, 2, dist 3. Right, so it's a little verbose, a little explicit, but it will work. Now, at least, if I didn't make any mistakes, this should work. So let's see what happens if I run it. Now we should have random positions. Up. Okay, click on the unique shape. Up. Yes. Okay, the positions are random, but you see that I forgot to take something into account because there's an offset, right? Everything is shifted a little bit to the bottom right. Why is that? Well, because the positions that we have, that we generated, actually correspond to the top left of our elements, right? So that is, the top left is centered, is nicely on this imaginary circle, but because we're drawing from the top left, everything is shifted kind of to the bottom right. So what we need to do is kind of offset our positions all to the top left, if you see what I mean, right? We need to correct for that. Well, we can do that really easily. What we can do, first of all, we need to know how big our elements are. So if I go here up, I see that the square is 2 grids, right? The grid is 32 pixels. In other words, our elements are 64 pixels in size, meaning that we need to offset our positions by half that size, right? Minus 32. How can we do that offset? Well, the easiest way is to specify a pole. A pole is basically the center of the imaginary circle. Right now, the center of the imaginary circle is the middle of the screen, where we can say minus 32, comma, minus 32. And then it will actually shift a little bit to the top left, and that is perfect, right? So if I run it now, up, now you see everything is nicely up, centered. Okay. Now, we're getting there, right? We're almost done. Now, but what we now want to do is make it extra fancy. We want to give feedback to the participant about which item they clicked on. So, how does that work? Well, first we can make use of a pretty nifty feature in OpenSesame 3.2, namely that in a mouse response, you can indicate the linked sketchpad, search display. And once you do that, then if I go to the variable inspector, I will show you mouse response. The mouse response item has a variable called cursor ROI, and what will actually happen is that the mouse response item will look on the linked sketchpad, and if you click on an item that has an element that has a name, the cursor ROI will have that name. So just to make it a little bit more concrete, so if you take a look at cursor ROI here, and if I click on the target, you will see that that will be target. If I click on the distractor, it will be called dist3 in this case, etc. Right? Okay, so we know what the participant clicked on. Now what we want to do is, if the participant clicks on the target, we want to change the color of the target to green to indicate that it was correct. If the participant clicked on another stimulus, one of the distractors, we change it to red to indicate that it was incorrect, and otherwise we do nothing. How are we going to do that? Well, again, we're going to use an inline script, so I pick it up, drag it here, and I say, call that inline script feedback. And then the first thing that we're going to do is say if var.cursorROI is not empty, right? So if the participant clicks on the background, then actually the cursor ROI will be empty and we don't have any element that the participant clicked on to change the color of. So in that case, we don't do anything. But if the cursor ROI is not empty, then we have our search display canvas, and we're going to get the element with the name cursor ROI, so the element that we clicked on, and then we're going to change the color property. What is the color property going to be? Well, it depends. It will be green if we clicked on the target. So, green. If var.cursor ROI is target, else it will be red. Right? So let me make this a little bit prettier. Up. So that color will be green if we clicked on the target. In other cases it will be red. Right? So we turn the target green and the distractors we turn red. Then we need to actually show the search display, right? Now we modify the contents of it, but we need to call .show in order to actually show it. And then we say clock.sleep, say 1 second again, in order to wait, and then we can see what we clicked on. Now, let's run it. Up, run. Let's see if it works. Okay, click on the unique shape. Now, if I click on the target, it should turn green. Oh, made a mistake. Search display. Ah, right, it's not called search display. Search display is the name of the item. The canvas is called search canvas, right? So I made a typo here. Search canvas. And here too. Up. Okay. Run it again. Up. Click on the unique shape. Now if I click on the target, it turns green. Very nice. If I click on one of the distractors, it turns red. Very nice. Up. Okay. Now perfect, right? So now we're actually doing something that is pretty fancy. We're doing something that's pretty advanced. We're really updating the contents of our sketchpad, the contents of our display based on what the participant does, right? What you click on. And you see that all of this, especially with this new functionality with the named sketchpad elements that are introduced in OpenSesame 3.2, is actually pretty simple, and we've been able to do this in 15 minutes or so. Now, of course, normally you would make this experiment a bit nicer, right? You would add probably multiple blocks with some breaks in between, right? In a practice phase, etc. But the basic structure of a moderately complicated experiment, I would say, is already here. Now, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you enjoy working with OpenSesame, and thank you very much for your attention.